Welcome to our early accessible education material echo session. We're really glad that you are here and ready to get that information that we're going to do in this community. So if you will, please put your name and contact information into the chat, as well if you feel comfortable in turning on your camera. That always helps everybody see each other. If we were in a training session at a conference, we'd all be in person, so seeing those smiling faces is always great. This ECHO is really a collaborative learning network, really designed to enhance our statewide capacity for ensuring that every young child, including infants and toddlers, can access and participate meaningful in early learning. Cynthia did an amazing job last month of kind of setting that stage for us. So thank you, Cynthia, for that. As a reminder, we are recording this session. So if you are on this session, you're consenting to being recorded. We store this in our iEcho platform as well as on our YouTube channel. So you can always go back and share this information with colleagues, re-review it. For me, it takes a minute to get into my brain. So I always love going back and listening to the trainings. For anybody who's new to the ECHO today, welcome. We are really glad to have you joining us. As I mentioned, this network is really focused on our youngest learners, so our infants, toddlers, and preschools with disabilities, to have access to those materials and tools to be able to participate meaningful in everyday routines and learning activities. This ECHO is supported by INCADEMY, which is the National Center on Accessible Digital Education Materials and Instructions. And it is housed out of the Institute for Disability Research Policy and Practice here at USU. We are hoping and hopeful that as we continue this network, we all get kind of a better idea of how we can support those young children. As Cynthia pointed out last month, there's not a lot of research or information on how we support that infants and toddlers in digital accessible education materials. So we're hopeful and grateful to have you guys here and to learn from all of you on the call, as well as our subject matter experts. And that's how we build that professional networking, right? Learning and hearing from each other. We love interactions. So if you have questions or comments, put those into the chat and we will make sure that they either get answered at that time or at the end of the session. So we love that interaction. Also, case narratives. So if there's a case that you want to present and get a ton of information from everybody on this call, please consider doing that. I am the lucky one who gets to present a little case that I'm struggling with today, and I can't wait to hear all of your guys' ideas on that. Renaming your profile, again, it's just building that community, professional networking as we get to know each other on this call. We've all been on Zoom for a while, but in case you need a refresher on how to raise your hand, I know our presenters are going to be asking us to use that reaction button today. So find where that is on your Zoom. And then again, just a quick reminder that if you are talking about individuals that we de-identify information, if you have any questions, please reach out to a hub member. They all have an asterisk in front of their name, and that just makes them easier to find on chat. So you can ask them those questions. We will be dropping in a survey towards the end of today's session that we do ask you to complete in order to get a certificate of attendance, as well as just remember some session etiquette. Respect our presenters. If you are willing to, please introduce yourself before you ask that question. And again, turning on that camera, it's always easier and better to look at faces instead of those black squares as we're doing that presentation. I mentioned our credit of attendance is with that survey. We also send out that survey in a post email with all of the sessions. All of the information shared in session is also stored on iEcho in the content section. So PowerPoints, handouts, all the recommendations that we're going to be gathering today are stored on there as well. And so I'm going to stop sharing and get their presentation up and turn the time over to Allison and Alissa. And I was trying to spotlight you guys really quickly for everybody. Okay. And obviously, as we heard at the beginning of this, my brain is not doing two things at one time. So Allison and Alissa, introduce yourselves while I find your guys' PowerPoint.
Yes, and I appreciate that. And I will say, I asked Janelle at the very beginning because I started having emails pop up and I realized that's not good while you're presenting and sharing slides. So I'm Allison Jones. I'm a TA specialist with the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center. It's also known as the ECTA Center. And I'm joined by my colleague, Alissa Rausch. I'll let
Hey
Alissa.
there. I'm also from the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center, and I'm just thrilled that Allison allowed me to be here with her. Allison's the real expert on this, but this is such exciting material that it's really great to be here. So we're excited to think through this with you.
Thank you. So we are very excited. Our main challenge is to not talk too much because Alyssa and I are both very excited about this topic. And I will just start out by saying, I think the reason I'm most passionate about it is because of all the years I worked in early childhood, whether it was childcare, state pre-K, I did early intervention as well. But in some of those earlier sectors, my colleagues and I wanted to provide the best support, the most positive environments, and we lacked the training, we lacked the support that we so desperately wanted. And so I think that's why I'm so passionate about this content is it really supports all practitioners and all adults who are supporting children with disabilities and developmental delays. So, next slide. So today we really hope to increase your understanding and use of low-tech assistive technology with infants and toddlers. We're going to share some examples, but it's not the extended list of examples. We want to talk about adaptations and assistance to promote access to and participation in early learning. That's really one of the main goals. We want to increase your awareness of online resources that are available at no cost that will also support access to meaningful participation and early learning opportunities for infants and toddlers. Next slide. So it's important to kind of ground us in this understanding that there's many ways children express themselves. And this is so key in our support of children and really thinking about levels of engagement is really important. We don't all engage in activities in the same way. Some of us are fully engaged by visual attention. Some of us are multitasking something else while we're engaged. And so engagement doesn't look the same for everyone. And so it's important for us to understand that principle also applies to children. So really it invites us to listen, observe, and plan differently to offer support that honors um, each child's way of being. So next slide. We also want to ground this in the understanding that children with disabilities do not need to be repaired or fixed. Just like all children, they need support to succeed. All children are entitled to developmentally appropriate materials, and that's one of the foundations. We don't have the time today to get into all of that, but that's another grounding area is developmentally appropriate practice. Um, Exemplary classroom practices that honor each child's strengths and areas of development. So, really looking at that an individual child and their specific development, their strengths, their needs, um, their interests, um, cultural um, cultural things that we need to take into account as well. And there's no one size fits all practices for children, and we must work to understand the strengths and needs of each child and family. And I'm going to invite Alissa to unmute and join me at times if she wants to. Um, we wanted to um, revisit some things that were shared in the first webinar of this series by our Academy friends. So accessible means a child with a disability can access the same information, engage in the same interactions, and otherwise participate or benefit from the same services, programs, and activities as children without disabilities in a manner that provides substantially equivalent timeliness, privacy, independence, and ease of use. And this is adapted from the Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division of Department of Education and Office of Civil Rights. So this is not something that's our opinion specifically. This is based on this department, two departments. So next slide. So timeliness, when we're talking about timeliness, we're talking about the material being usable by learners with disabilities when an experience or activity begins. So having it ready. A lot of times we talk about being prepared, planning out, and adaptation support is very important. And sometimes when an adaptation can be generalized to more than one activity, making sure you have it ready for that next routine or learning opportunity. Independence is another key piece of learners with disabilities can use the material on their own or as intended or as independently as possible. Privacy, learners with disabilities can access the material without sharing login or other credentials. And I think, noted that this is really more applicable to older ages and more school age students, but it's still something we should consider. Ease of use, the material works seamlessly with the assistive technology used by learners with disabilities. Next slide. And then it's really important, again, to ground this on the key defining features of inclusion, which are access, participation, and support. So access to information, access to learning opportunities, access to settings and activities, those routines, to support meaningful participation. And then the support that is maybe needed, these adaptations. So next slide. And we are using definitions that were created by the Center for Early Literacy Learning that was federally funded many, many years ago. So that's what we're basing our definitions on. There's plenty of definitions though, so don't get too stuck on these specifically. This is really just to help us define it and share so that we're all kind of understanding it from the same angle. So we define adaptation as a modification or change made to an environment, activity, materials, or interaction to maximize a child's ability to participate in everyday, interest-based learning opportunities. So that's a lot. So what we hope to in this session is to really kind of unpack that for you. Next slide. And then I'm trying to make sure I haven't jumped ahead to my partner's part. And then why it matters. Adaptations are important because they ensure that children with disabilities can express their interests and have them interpreted correctly. They can engage in learning activities with their peers. It's important so they can become skillful and competent in learning activities, so they can practice their existing skills and then practice additional growing, emerging skills. And then they offer children alternative ways to demonstrate their learning. And I think that's another really big, important piece when we think about engagement. So, in other words, they offer the necessary support so that children with disabilities can participate in activities at the greatest level possible alongside their peers. And adaptations provide dignity for children. Next slide. So, Alissa, I think you're going to share the questions for our Mythbusters. We're going to take a moment and yeah.
Okay, so this is where we're going to ask you all to either, turn on your screens and give us a thumbs up if you as you hear the statement. We'll put it in the chat also. Give us a thumbs up. If it is, if you think it's true, give us a thumbs down. If you think that it's false, you can also use those emojis that at the bottom where there's a reaction button, as you saw at the beginning. So the very first one that I'm going to put in the chat is right here. Assistive technology is designed to teach children how to use iPads. Yeah, nice. Okay, awesome. That's so wonderful. Indeed, that is false. When we're talking about assistive technology, particularly for very young children, as Allison did such a nice job of describing, really one of the things is that we want children to be able to participate in meaningfully in the activities that they find joyful. Very young children play and build relationships. And so assistive technology and what we'll be talking about today really helps them to do that. Okay, are we ready for our second one? Get your thumbs ready to go. And I will put the second one in. The second one is assistive technology always involves high-tech materials. Nice. Thank you all for your answers to that. That's exactly it. That's not the case. Today we're going to be talking a lot about low technology or no technology supports for children, which of course is very developmentally appropriate, as Allison talked about, for very young children. That's not to say that children don't sometimes benefit from that, but for very young children, there's lots of no tech or low tech ways in which we can support them. Okay, here is the third one. A lot of times, children, very young children, birth to age 3, are supported in their home. And so this next question or this next statement relates to that. Assistive technology can or should include materials already in the family's home and the child's environment. Do you want to, yeah, nice. Ooh, you are so good at the emojis. How did you get that? We'll talk about it another day, but that exploding thumbs up was pretty amazing. Yeah, that's exactly right. Because they are very young children, we just really want them to be part of the natural environment. So as we talk about adaptations throughout routines and activities, what you will find is that we are thinking about those activities really naturally within the child's environment, not asking the family to necessarily learn something new or do something that we have to bring with us or that they don't already know and understand. Okay, here's another one that is really common that we hear about related to young children. If you teach a young child to communicate with pictures, the child will never use verbal language. Great. Y'all are assistive technology experts, so we're preaching to the choir here, but it's one that we often hear, definitely when we talk with families. And we might propose low tech or no tech options that include objects or pictures like the one that you'll see today. Families might say, oh, but I really want them to talk, so let's not do that. And we really do have to dispel that myth and share that actually those are all ways of communicating that all children, particularly very young children, use in addition to or in place of verbal language. So that's, and I have one more. We have one more for you. No, I guess two more. Okay, we hope you're enjoying this activity. Here is the next one. The effectiveness of assistive technology should be measured by how meaningful it is for the family and the child in their everyday routines and activities. Is that statement true or false? Mm-hmm. Yeah, lots of truths coming up. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, what we really before we start with the technology piece, we start with the family's child and the child's strengths, their concerns, their context, and then it's from there that we start to think about what are the appropriate adaptations, materials, and different resources that we can use to support them. Okay, and here is the last one. This one refers to Part C providers. And Part C providers are those, for those of you that don't know, work with children with disabilities birth to age 3. I think probably everybody knows that, but just in case. This is suggesting that the OTs and speech language pathologists and developmental specialists who go into work with very young children should bring materials and prescribe assistive technology that they think is best before talking to the family. And that is a no. Thank you so much for those answers. That is false. Really, what you'll find today is so much of what it is that we will unpack, as Allison said, around some of this really has to do with what is the context for the child and the family, what's the natural setting that the child is in, what's already there. And so we definitely don't want to bring something in that's too much. Janelle, we have a video to share that's coming up. So I'm wondering how about if I share the PowerPoint, because then we have the video embedded and it'll show right away. Does that work for you?
That works just fine. I will stop
Okay.
sharing and you can just remember
Awesome.
to share sound as you're.
Yep. Got it. Okay. Share sound and optimize video. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and turn this on. And I'm also just going to go back just a couple of slides because I've jumped ahead here. So as we discussed, when we're working with really young children, what we want to think about is what sparks joy for children. Developmentally appropriate practice for children birth through age 8 describes 3 important things: belonging, engagement, and joyful learning. And so that's really what it is that we want to focus on, and that understanding that assistive technology really does indeed make these things possible for very young children. So what we also know is that responsive adults are the key, whether it's a home environment or a classroom environment where all children can be successful. And so here you just see ways in which responsive adults in the child's environment, whether that be in a care setting like a classroom or a community childcare or a home, or their own home environments, just the routines that we really want to think of where adults can be responsive with children. We've provided here just a couple of questions that you want to start with. Again, we don't want to bring ideas for what we have after we read an IFSP from a child or read some sort of evaluation. We don't want to have anything that's diagnosis based until we can see the child in the environment. And so really one of the things that we want to be sure that we're sharing or looking at is, what is the child really doing well already? What are the family's concerns? And then really to sit and watch and observe how the child is currently participating in the routines or activities that the family is thinking about. So if the family, if the culture of the family is to sit down and have a family meal, then what we really want to do is think about, how is the child participating in that? And then the next question is, how could this child be more involved in that everyday learning activity? So really asking the family, what would you like the child to be able to do to participate in this routine? And then it's from there that we can think about different adaptations or assistive technology supports that might be able to support that child and that family. And then finally, again, we're really focused on that notion for developmentally appropriate practice. We think about joyful learning, belonging, and engagement. So that's what we're going to continue to say is, what does this child need in order to have joyful learning, engagement in the activities that are within their natural environment, and feel like they belong in the social environment, whether that's at home, with their siblings, with their families, or if that's very early on with peers in a community setting. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're just going to go through a few adaptation examples, and we're going to just talk about what those different adaptation examples are, and then we'll provide you some examples of those, and then also a question to help you think through how you might use that in the future. On your screen right now, you'll see a list on the left and a diagram on the right. On the left, that list goes from basically least to most restrictive types of adaptations or low-tech assistive technology that we use with very young children. So that means that the least intrusive form of assistive technology is to adapt the environment. Then we're going to think about, okay, how do we want to adapt the activity? Is there a way that a child can participate in a different way? Then we want to think about the materials themselves. Is there some sort of adaptation that needs to happen in the materials in order to support the child? Then after that, we're going to adapt the instruction. So do we need to change something about how we're teaching or how a child is demonstrating their learning? And then the very last thing we're going to do is provide assistance. Allison and I really wanted to talk a little bit about this providing physical assistance piece, because when we're talking about very young children, oftentimes this is where adults go first, is that they jump in with physical assistance and they don't think about those adaptations that can happen in the environment, with the activity, with the materials first. And so we really want to provide some context to what could you do before you put your hands on a child in a way that might facilitate their learning independently. That really goes back to that definition that Allison talked about of accessibility, where independence is one of those features that we really just want to be sure that we're highlighting. Not that everybody's independent, but that giving children that opportunity to do that is important. The diagram on the right is just, again, a similar diagram that really says, think about those environments, activities, and routines, then think about the materials, and then think about instruction. Step 4 on here would be physical sorts of supports. And so there's some resources here, and Allison has curated a great list of resources that we'll share with you as well. Okay, so let's get into talking about some of these adaptations a little bit more specifically. And I have the pleasure of talking about just the first couple. The first is the environmental adaptations. So modifications that are made to an environment to ensure that a child can get to and participate in activities independently. So when we're thinking about a home or some sort of an environment, a child that might be in a childcare environment, we always want to look at the environment first. And what we want to say is what is going to be the most, what's going to provide this child the most ease of use and independence. That's going to be the timeliest way to get the child accessibility. Does something need to be moved or switched or changed? And I just hit the wrong button. Sorry about that. So examples of environmental adaptations are things like lowering things on shelves for children that are scooting on their bellies, for children that are scooting on their bottoms, and getting around that way. Children that need to roll to get to things to reach them. When we lower things onto the ground, we make them accessible for children. And again, for infants and toddlers specifically, that's accessibility for almost all children, right? Having those different ways of having an environment where kids can reach them from different positions is just, again, developmentally appropriate practice for very young children. And then we also think about if a child has any sort of adaptive equipment, what could we do in the environment that could make space for that? So that's really the first level of things that we think about starting with. And so the question we often ask when we're thinking about environmental adaptations is, to what extent does this environment encourage exploration and learning for this particular child? So again, if the goal is joyful learning, belonging, and engagement, to what extent does the environment encourage or discourage this? And that's exactly what we use as a measure for thinking about environmental adaptations. When we're thinking about communication devices, oftentimes the answer to this question can mean that all of the other children in the environment are using whatever communication adaptations or equipment you're using. So if some kids are using objects to make transitions, that is something that could be used for all children to make transitions. If a child is using a picture, a slightly older child is using a picture to communicate, then pictures are part of the communication that is in every child's experiences and activities. The second is activity adaptations. And this is really looking at those materials that children might be demonstrating interest in or might not be demonstrating interest in because they're not really accessible to them. And so what you see on this page is just easier ways, simple adaptations that have been made so that children can pick things up more easily than picking up a picture. And that's simply by attaching a popsicle stick to this. So it's just created an activity where children who are acting something out or using something to participate don't have to pick something up that's too hard, but instead allows them to participate in a way that is a little bit easier. We talk about examples of this. We often add visual, kinesthetic, or auditory aids to support children. So this is really a very common way for us to do this. But we might add movements to a song to keep a child engaged. So if they're not using a singing voice or not speaking the words to something, then we can ask them to participate with emotion that might that would allow them to demonstrate their learning and their understanding in that way. We use props a ton in very early childhood. We use objects to help us do that, and to tell stories, to show to show learning, to do all of those things. And then, of course, also as children get older, we use sign language. Again, these are all things that can be beneficial for all children, birth to age 3, but really important things to think about. So when we're thinking about activity adaptations, we often think about the question, what addition could be made to this activity to support the child's participation and learning? So is there something that we can add or change or alter about the activity that would allow children who are not currently demonstrating joyful learning, engagement, and belonging into this activity? All right, I'm going to pass it off to Allison now for the last few adaptations here.
Yeah, thank you, Alyssa. I could have just listened to you the rest of the time. That was great. Thank you. I did want to mention we intended to do a poll of participants, but we got sidetracked on that. But I did go through the participant chat and just noted all the expertise that's represented here today, and just appreciate the direct services that each of you are providing. And there's for a lot of you, this is just affirming of what you already do and how you already practice. So please share examples as well. Um, so the next one, the other thing I wanted to mention is that this framework from the continuum, the adaptation continuum, is from Philippa Campbell and Suzanne Milbourne and Kara's Kit. And so it's a great resource. There is a cost for it. It's available at the DEC, Division for Early Childhood's website store. And I don't usually share things that are a cost. I usually only mention things that are free, but it is in the list that we provided of additional resources. I think it was published in 2007, maybe, but it's just that useful. It's just really incredible. So I wanted to share that that's where this framework, we kind of borrowed from it. So material adaptations. These are probably the things that most resonate for you. It's, I think, the most common adaptation for folks when we've done trainings on this before. Folks can usually come up with a ton of examples of this. And a lot of times we learn a lot of these ways of adapting materials from our occupational therapists, I will say. When I was in the classroom, I always loved watching the occupational therapists share ways to adapt materials. Next slide. So some examples are using large grip crayons to scribble, using child-sized utensils, placing non-slip shelf liner under bowls or plates, thinking about older infants and toddlers. This is really helpful for and the bowls and plates that have the sectional dividers are really great examples of how kids can, when they're learning to self-feed, they can use those utensils and push against the dividers in the sectional bowls. So that's just another example. Next slide. And we're going to watch a video of example. So I'll let Alyssa start that.
It's still a little soft on my end.
You see it? It's brown. Oh, yeah. You want to hold the spoon? Good job. Good job. You're holding the spoon. bumpy. You want some waffles and then you can have some more prunes? Waffles first and then prunes. Good job. Okay, you had some waffle and now we're going to next have some prunes. Can you hold the spoon?
We did share this video as well in the resources. So what you can see is when you look across this video, they break it down into environment, materials, and instruction. Again, that same sort of description to really show how different adaptations were done environmentally with materials and also with instruction. So you can explore that more. This is a video from our partners at the STEMI Center.
Thanks, Alyssa. Yeah, I was going to mention that too. We're pulling the different types of adaptations apart to really help you kind of understand some of those features or characteristics, but so often we're using different adaptations together, and so that's fine too. So with material adaptations, we often think about, is there anything that could be done to the actual item, the object, to support or enhance the child's exploration or participation in the activity? So again, it's not prescriptive. It's really looking at that individual child's participation within that activity or routine. And how are they currently participating? And is there an adaptation that could be provided that would allow them to participate at a greater capacity? The next adaptation are instructional adaptations. The adult modifies or adjusts their instruction and requirements based on the individual child so they can participate as meaningfully and independently as possible. And so some common ways we do that are by reducing the amount of steps to participate. The instructions we provide itself, we might reduce the steps or provide different ways of instruction, lessening the length of the activity, and just really thinking about those pieces. So examples on the next slide. Waiting and allowing the child enough time to respond before providing more adaptations, before jumping in. So I saw a lot of Part C folks on the participant list. I imagine most of you probably refer to this as wait time. This is one of those things when I provided early intervention and attended trainings that was discussed a lot. And for me, sometimes that required sitting on my hands. So I didn't immediately jump in and provide physical assistance when it wasn't necessary. Sometimes this can be adding pictures along with print to represent verbal instruction. Obviously, the print piece would be for older children. Allowing children to stand during an activity rather than sit. So again, thinking about what's the purpose of this routine or activity, and particularly with classroom routines, I think it's especially important to think about, is this my personal expectation? And like having every kid sit in circle time rather than this child really needs to stand and move while he's processing this information, and really being flexible with that and thinking about the bottom line is what do each individual child need, or what does each individual child need to fully participate in this activity? It's going to look different for each child possibly. So another instructional adaptation could be creating an object schedule I recall seeing an example from, I think it was the National Deaf Blind Association, and it was a big dry erase board with objects that represented the daily routines Velcroed onto the board. And so the child was able to grasp the object and pull it off and, understand this is what's coming first, and then explore what was going to be coming next in the schedule, in the routine. And so, there's so many great examples um, that are already available with different partners on the internet. So I would just say these are just a few examples. And some of you on this call may be able to share a whole lot more than we've shared here. So next slide. So for this one, it's important to understand, do I need to adapt my instructions so that the child understands the ways they can participate? Have I given the child an adequate amount of time to complete the task? And have I required too many steps? And one of the most popular strategies or adaptations that I have found is the first then phrase that our friends who do the pyramid work around social emotional development um, talk about giving, one instruction at a time. First we're going to do this, then we're doing that. To really, because sometimes we just say way too much information for a child to be able to process. And so it's just a really quick and easy way to simplify it. And I had learned that phrase. And then when I had my own child, I really valued it with my own child to be able to help them process the expectations and what's coming next. Yeah, learning sequence can be complex for sure. And then the last adaptation on the continuum, um, Alissa was talking about it earlier, is providing assistance. So we can go to the next slide. So an adult or a peer provides physical assistance. That can be, you know, hand over hand is something we commonly refer to, and hand under hand is something that I learned about many years ago. Um, and really, it was an aha moment for me in thinking about letting the child still guide my hand and what they were comfortable with exploring. So, in Kara's kit, they state that sorry, if we can go back, if you really want to provide assistance only when other adaptations have not worked and as a last resort. And so I wanted to just pause and ask you to add in the chat why you think that is important.
I've learned on Echoes that there's always a delay as folks are entering stuff into the chat. So feel free to unmute too if you have an idea about why this is important. Yes, so some of what's coming up in the chat to reduce reliance on a partner and to increase independence. Yeah, thanks.
Right, because everybody knows a toddler's favorite expression is, I do it myself. And our kids with disabilities want that too, even if they can't say it.
That's right.
That's exactly right. Child-driven engagement, allow the child to explore opportunities themselves. That's right. All of those are really good answers. Increase independence and success. Yeah, may not like hand touching. There's especially if they want to attempt it on their own. It can take time to process. Yeah,
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 and a lot of
teaching.
times when we are providing that assistance, we haven't allowed enough wait time. I just think that's very common. I'm guilty of it as myself. And so yeah, and thinking going back to what Alyssa was saying at the beginning, that joyful learning and belonging and that sense of confidence that I did it, you know. Yeah, it can take away autonomy and self-determination. Yeah.
Okay, next slide.
Thank you. And yeah, we
Do you
can go
see
to
the
the next
spinny
slide.
circle of death?
Uh-oh.
It just started. I'm going to stop sharing and then I will reshare. That's always a bad sign when that thing starts going. Okay, let's try this again. Nope. Oh my goodness. Yikes. Let me try it one other way. I apologize. I don't know why that happened.
That's all right.
If you need me
So,
to share again, I can do that,
Thank
Alyssa.
you. Thank you.
so I'll just share some of the other examples that we may not have mentioned. Modeling for a child how to do something. Um, such as clapping their hands, is another way we might provide assistance. Peer intervention, siblings doing for, and I know that can be tricky. I've seen that myself with older siblings stepping in and doing a lot for, and really helping siblings understand we need to let them try it themselves, you know, because they can do it. Um, so those are some other examples. And so one of the questions that we often think of is, um, oh, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. So again, like, is this absolutely necessary? Were there other adaptations we might have considered before we jump straight into providing assistance? And then, as we get the slides pulled up, because I know we don't have a lot of time, I'm just going to go ahead and share. There's some considerations that we think about, kind of as a recap. Um, thanks, Alyssa. So, have you observed the child to know what his or her interests and abilities are? Um, there's so much research on strengths-based learning, um, that if this is new to you, I would encourage you um, to search the internet for. There's a lot of great resources. Um, Carl Dunst and Carol Trivet um, did lots of research around strengths-based learning and interest-based learning. And so those are really important features, starting with what's the child interested in and what are they already able to do. Um, and to what extent is the child currently participating in an activity? In what ways could the child be more involved? Um, and maybe they're involved at the level that they're able to be involved in. That's fine, and that's where you stop. Um, how will the adaptation enhance the child's ability to participate in the activity? I mean, that's really the key point. You're not providing an adaptation just to provide an adaptation. Like we said, this is not prescriptive. Um, how will it be implemented? That's another key piece when we talked about earlier about the timeliness, being prepared to with whatever it is that needs to be provided. Um, and then could it be generalized to other activities or routines? That's something that's also key. If it's working with one activity or routine, and we think it'll work in another one, if the child's already familiar with it, you know, there's a lot of successes there. And then how will you know when the adaptation may no longer be needed? So I think that's another important thing that we don't just continue, we don't do this one time and we're done. These questions are really helping us think about, you know, each time we provide it, we're thinking about, okay, so how are they engaged in this? And I think this is what's so important when we work with families or if we're providing support to a practitioner who's supporting a child directly, is thinking about, okay, we had this plan, we tried it out, how did it go? And how many times did we try it out? Do we need to tweak it? So because so often we hear folks say, well, I tried it and it didn't work. And so this is where it's important, going back to how did the child respond when you provided XYZ? And how many times did you try it? Did you think about tweaking it this way? It's really more than a just I did it, it's a checkbox kind of thing. Um, so next slide. And I am going to turn it back over to Alissa.
Great. We'll just spend this last few minutes sharing with you a few resources. Again, Allison curated a list of all of these things that you can gather on your own. What we know, Allison went through all those considerations. What we know is that very young children have a huge variability in their development, and children that are seen in Part C or birth to 3 are potentially have a developmental delay. They are also potentially at risk for one. So what we really want to be thinking about is just a large range of ways in which children can demonstrate their learning and demonstrate their knowledge of the world as they begin to develop. Allison has been really involved in some of the developmentally or just the Vision for Early Childhood recommended practices. And those practices are under revision and of no cost to you or to families. You can access the ECTA practice improvement tools. And some of those have an environmental adaptations checklist. These are available on the website in English and in Spanish. And you can just use this as a way to think through before we start doing anything major here. What can we just do in the environment that might be helpful, whether it's in a child's home or whether it's in their community setting? And then the next one again gives all of these different just different descriptions of how environmental adaptations can be used to increase learning opportunities. So Allison and the team at ECTA have done a great job with these. We also would encourage you to think about accessing the National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations page. You can see the link in the materials that we have provided. There is a resource library that if you click on that, if you click on the resource library, you can search for tools across audience. So you might pick family, you might pick educator, you might pick provider. And then there will also be some different things around potentially inclusion of children with disabilities or supports for children with disabilities, and that can be really helpful. One of the things that is on that website that is used a lot is some instructional adaptations that are already done for you. So you can print these out and have them done if you're supporting a teacher in circle time with very young children and you want to provide some visuals for them. There's some things there. There's also something called the Backpack series, which is the #1 downloaded thing on Pyramid Model, which is a lot of supports for families around routines and activities. And then there is our partners at the STEMI Center as well, which is the Center for Innovation and for Inclusion across STEM activities for children with children with disabilities. So lots of great stuff from that. The learning trajectories that are part of that are really helpful in understanding development. And then again, as we watch that video of the little one, you can see how they break things up around environment, materials, and instruction. And again, these are all available free and can be shared with families or other providers. And then our partners at Academy also wanted us to remember to share with you that on this myths and facts document addressing accessible educational materials that was put out in 2024, there is a link that actually is specifically for assistive technology under IDEA Part C, so for children birth to 3, and this is available as well to you on the resource page. We didn't leave very much time for questions and but it is what it is. Do you all have is there anything that we can offer clarity for or answer any specific questions?
So I am going to just go ahead and say we are going to forego doing the case. That was just such a wealth of information, and I want to leave time for questions. So go ahead if anybody has any questions to our experts, and we will do the case next month.
I myself was trained as an occupational therapist originally back in the previous century, and and I think as I worked as an occupational therapist, I first worked at the VA hospital here in Colorado, and then I found my way to early childhood. But I think one of the things that we just really know is that a lot of folks like OTs and SLPs are trained birth to end of life. And so really to have some specific supports around very young children where there is that variability of development and all of that can be helpful. One of the pieces of data that we're finding more and more is that children with disabilities, particularly very young children, are held to standards that are actually not very developmentally appropriate. We do ask them to do things so many times and for so many minutes and for so many moments that our intervention actually exceeds what they would do in normal development or in typical development if they did not have a disability. And so really thinking about that as we're doing this work, I think becomes really important.
And I just shared in the chat, did anything surprise you? How did this resonate for you? Is it something that um, was reaffirming or validating? Did anything stand out to you that you found helpful?
This is Janelle, and I'm going to pipe in just because I guess I talk a lot. Um, I really loved, I mean, it gets me rejuvenated to then want to provide some of these things to the families that I serve. But I also liked the STEMI Center research or handouts and resources that you shared. So I really appreciated that one.
Hi, this is Deb in Oregon, and I just dropped a link in the chat for Go Baby Go. I don't know if you're familiar with that organization, but I've worked and I just stepped down from a statewide assistive technology program, working across the Lifeline, Twinkles to Wrinkles, but really Go Baby Go does mobility. You know, they modify ride-on vehicles and all, giving people access to their community. But they also did workshops with me. We co-presented. We did book blinging and adding modifications to tools and all. But Go Baby Go was a really helpful, and I don't know, you may already have that in your resources, but I just wanted to share that. And thanks so much for today. It does validate that there's some good things going on out there. And I just want to say one more thing. Cynthia, I know you're on, and I know that part of the work that you're doing is about pre-service and helping to find ways for teachers, educators of all levels to get some of this in more than just a single semester out of context. And so I look forward to hearing what you develop in that way, because I think across the lifespan, it's needed. So thank you for sharing.
And this is Cynthia, since my name was invoked. Thank you, Deb. I always appreciate an opinion, an opportunity to promote Academy's targeted technical assistance. So I'll go ahead and drop in the chat for anybody who's interested in our pre-service technical assistance. We're working with Teach Access to better prepare teacher educators, administrator educators. There's somewhat of a focus on that on pre-K-12, only because that seems to be the audience that we've drawn so far, which I think might be expected. But having pre-service educators in the area of early childhood education would be fantastic to round out the group. So I will go ahead and drop that link to the to that TA opportunity in the chat. That is a community of practice that just launched in February, and we had our second meeting last week. So it's still a very, very new group. Thanks, Deb.
Yeah, I've been having conversation in Oregon with our early childhood folks ever since we started with an AIM cohort a few years ago. And I know that people are just really hesitant to introduce even the smallest technology because they think they want to give the kids time to do it without the technology. They just don't realize what all the technology could involve and how what a disservice it can be if you don't start using a switch with a student early so that they can start learning cause and effect that will lead to literacy down the line. So I think it's kind of universal. Who was it earlier that said they have a hard time stop talking? This is one I've just really become passionate about. So thanks again for letting me join.
Thanks, Deborah. I think you and I could chat a lot. I think when I've worked with practitioners in a coaching role, one of the questions that I found really helpful was always pointing them back to the child. Like what happened with the child when you provided XYZ. So I think, you know, what you shared about the concern of providing assistive technology um, is is very real. So, going back to that child and thinking about, but how did they respond? What how did they interact? What skills were they able to use? What skills were they able to practice? What strengths did they practice multiple, and how many times did they get to practice that skill? That's one of the things that is so important about those everyday routines and activities is it provides an opportunity for a child to practice existing skills and then those emerging skills. And so, yeah. Preaching to the choir, I know.
I think the slide I liked the most in your presentation was the one about the adaptation continuum, least to most restrictive, um, least most restrictive. And it reminds me of a program I worked with years ago. It was called Let's Participate, and it was a federal grant. And in their program, one of the things that they did for their providers or with their providers was they had an agreement that they would not put hands on, would not do direct instruction until they had tried all those other levels of the continuum. So if I can put that something in the environment and then the child can use it successfully by themselves. That's always, the goal. So really like having that continuum and using it when I work with practitioners, and also families. I think all of us are invested in the child being successful. And I think it's important to know that, especially for very young children, failure is an important part of building success. So if we can hold off on having direct intervention and do some of those other things like changing the environment or modifying the task, we'll see much more growth in our children with disabilities.
Thanks, Gail. And I think for me, one of the things that I've seen speaking to parents and to families is when you start off in early intervention, providing assistive technology support or adaptations along with the family, and helping them think through this because they're spending the bulk of the time with their child. Most of the time, we're in there for an hour a week. And so, really, that teaming approach builds the family's confidence, and validates that yes, you do know your child better than I do. I come to this visit with some developmental understanding, child development, but you know your child's interests, you know what makes them excited, what makes them smile and laugh. And this is just a great time to start that partnership so that when they do go into the school system, the families already are speaking for their child. They're not looking to the practitioner in that IEP meeting, that transition meeting, to answer those questions. They've been involved in this from the get-go, and they are the ones who've tried it out during those home routines. So sorry, I just had to get that in because that's another big passion of mine is really meaningfully partner and team with families.
It also, the continuum puts, or prevents it or reduces the likelihood that somebody's going to come in and say, okay, I need this high-tech augmented communication device, or, get this 2-year-old an iPad or things like that. That's and the opposite end of that extreme where when we think of assistive technology and accessible materials, we think of the high-tech stuff first. So I think it's important to emphasize that you start at that end of the curriculum or of the continuum where you're adapting the environment.
And Allison, I really appreciated your comment that you just made about empowering the families. And I think that's one of the things that as we move forward with this network, like continuing to help support us all to have a better understanding of how do we help those families. I remember a story, Cynthia, I'm saying your name again, but don't feel free that you have to talk. But she just talked about like that a family then said, oh, I didn't know that I could ask for that. I just always thought my child was going to be behind. And so as we talk about AT or accessible education material, helping families know that they can advocate for that really early and that they should. And as a team member, that's my role, is to help families be able to do that. So I really appreciated that comment. And if there aren't any other questions or comments, then I will just do a plug to remind you all to take that survey. That survey just helps us gather information about what you guys want to see as part of these sessions. And then just remind you all that we are going to be meeting again on April 28th at whatever time it is, your time. I struggle with saying all the different time zones. And so, and we will be hearing from Gail talking to us about assistive technology using the modified SET framework for Part C. So we hope to see you all next month, and we will do our case next month. So thank you all and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.